There is a reason some people restart their lives every few weeks. And the strange part is, they are usually very good at beginning. The real problem appears later. Because at some point, every new beginning stops feeling new. And the moment that happens, something inside them starts pulling away from it. Not because the goal stopped mattering, not because they became lazy, but because continuing something after it loses its emotional freshness feels heavier than starting again. Today, I'm going to show you why some people become trapped in cycles of reinvention, why starting over becomes emotionally addictive, and what Japanese training systems understood centuries ago about the moment where most people quietly disappear from their own lives. Tell me honestly, what is one thing you keep restarting in your life? Because the pattern you are about to understand is probably affecting more areas of your life than you realize. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Always Began Again. The story I'm about to tell you happened to a woman named Aiko. Aiko was not lazy. She bought books. Every few weeks, she rebuilt her life from the beginning. New morning routine, new productivity system, new goals. And every time she started again, something inside her felt relieved. She woke up early, drank more water. It felt like she had finally become the person she was supposed to be. But then, usually somewhere between day 4 and day 10, something changed. Nothing external. The routine still made sense, but the emotional atmosphere around it began to shift. The routine no longer felt exciting, and that was the moment the distance began, not a dramatic collapse, just a subtle separation between her and the thing she had already decided to continue. But continuing no longer felt natural. Eventually, Aiko noticed something disturbing. She did not restart randomly. She always restarted at the exact same emotional point. Chapter 2. The Emotional Reset. Most people think they start over because the previous plan failed. That is usually not true. Most of the time, the plan was perfectly fine. The problem was that the plan had started carrying emotional history. No skip days, no inconsistency. But after repetition enters the system, the brain starts associating the routine with self-evaluation. Now the notebook remembers the days you disappeared. And slowly, the action stops feeling clean. This is why people suddenly redesign their entire lives at midnight. Not because the old system failed, but because the old system remembers them. Aiko began realizing that every new beginning gave her temporary emotional relief. But eventually, every new beginning became old. And when it became old, the same feeling returned. Chapter 3. The Japanese principle most people never learn. In Japanese Zen training, discipline is not built around emotional intensity. A monk does not wake up asking, "Do I feel connected to practice today?" The bell rings. The body moves, the practice begins. Not because the monk feels inspired, but because repetition removes emotional negotiation from the system. This is why Japanese training systems place enormous importance on continuity. Not intensity, continuity. Aiko had built her entire life around emotional alignment. When something felt emotionally alive, she moved toward it easily. But when the emotional intensity faded, she unconsciously interpreted that as a sign something was wrong. And this is exactly where most people destroy consistency. They believe the loss of emotional excitement means the path is no longer right. The beginning is imagination. Repetition is reality. And reality feels heavier because now there is history attached to the action. Chapter 4. The Real Addiction. Aiko believed she was addicted to self-improvement. She was wrong. What she was actually addicted to was emotional renewal. Modern culture rewards this behavior constantly, but almost nobody talks about the psychological danger hidden inside constant restarting, because every new beginning delays confrontation with continuity. One night, Aiko sat at her desk creating another perfect plan for her future. And while writing it, she suddenly realized something uncomfortable. The relief she felt was not coming from becoming someone new. It was coming from escaping the emotional weight of the previous version of herself. That realization frightened her, because for the first time, she saw that starting over was not solving the pattern. It was protecting the pattern. Chapter 5. The point where most people quit. There is a specific moment where most people abandon their routines. The first morning the routine feels ordinary. The first workout that feels emotionally empty. The first day where discipline no longer feels inspiring. This is where people begin negotiating again. But the system is usually not the problem. The problem is that the brain expects continuity to feel emotionally rewarding forever. Japanese practice systems never depended on this illusion. A craftsman repeats movements thousands of times, but because repetition removes the need to rediscover your identity every morning. Aiko realized she had built dozens of entrances into new lives, but almost nothing that could survive emotional repetition. Chapter 6. The smallest change. Aiko decided to stop rebuilding her life completely. Instead, she created one rule. Every morning before touching her phone, she would write one sentence inside the same notebook. One sentence. It felt too small, too insignificant. But this time, she understood something important. The intensity of the beginning was part of the problem, because intense beginnings create intense emotional expectations, and emotional expectations eventually collapse. So she kept the action small. One sentence, every morning. And around day 11, the old feeling returned. But for the first time, she noticed something different. The emotional resistance was still there, but the action was too small to escape from. So she wrote the sentence anyway, without inspiration, without emotional connection. And for the first time, she continued after the emotional freshness disappeared. Chapter 7. The fear behind starting over. 30 days later, Aiko looked through the notebook. But the notebook contained something she had almost never experienced before. Evidence of continuity. And suddenly, she understood the real fear behind starting over. The fear was never about beginning again. She already knew she could begin again. She had done that hundreds of times. The real fear was that every new beginning would eventually stop feeling emotionally clean. That every fresh start would slowly accumulate history, imperfection, hesitation, and emotional weight. And once she understood that, she stopped worshiping the beginning. Because the beginning was never where transformation happened. Transformation happened later. In the moment where the excitement disappeared, the emotional distance appeared, and she returned anyway. That was the moment Japanese practice systems were built around. Not the clean beginning. The ordinary continuation after the clean feeling dies. Because that is the moment where identity finally stops restarting itself and starts becoming real. Not through motivation, intensity, or another perfect beginning, but through returning after the feeling disappears and the old self asks you to restart.